Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 13 of season 5. Sam and I had a recent discussion around Microsoft's new Cloud PKI service, a service that allows you to manage and deploy device and user certificates from Intune. Here are a few things we covered. What are user and device certificates and how are they used? How is a PKI solution normally managed? What is Microsoft's Cloud PKI? And how much does it cost?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you doing this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. Busy week as always. How about you?
Yeah, it seems like there's, lots of activity in the, should we call it the sphere of Microsoft? I don't know. It seems like, it's just hot with, new releases, updates, the, the the AI mill turns, cloud doesn't slow down either, there's just, new updates and changes. I think, it's just, I think we said it on our last episode, the amount of just updates we had, when we did our end of month, review. I think that just really shows sort of what's going on in the place. I mean, I think a big focus for us has been Copilot for security. That landing and the first week or so of everybody, well, at least publicly talking about the product and starting to use it. So there's been a lot of hive of activity in and around that.
Yeah, definitely. Copilot for security has definitely been out there, being talked about a lot.
Yeah, no,
And,
definitely.
and you're right. Yeah, I think there's a load of features, updates already that have come out this month that want to talk about, but we'll wait till our news episode in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but yeah, it's been busy. It's definitely been busy in the Microsoft world.
yeah. No, it's really good to see as well. You definitely can't fault Microsoft for the amount of money, and effort, people that they actually, put behind their products, right? I know a lot of other vendors do as well. I'm not, sort of discrediting anyone else, but the amount of, I don't know, the amount of just effort and time that goes into some of these products and their updates is just, it's crazy. It's like, another level, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's because of the amount of areas that Microsoft are in
Yeah,
that we see. It seems like a lot of change, I guess. Because I think there's probably for a single product or solution there might be 4, 5, 6, 7 changes maybe throughout the year, but times that by, I mean, just in the security space, times that by 6, 7, 8, 10 products. It just seems, um, like there's a lot of development there.
yeah. And when like one of your products is like Entra, as an example, that's that's like that is actually a family of products, right? I suppose I'm talking about Entra ID, but even with inside of that, it's just product after product. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, no, really good to see. What are we talking about this week, Alan?
So we're going to talk about public key infrastructures, PKIs, and Microsoft's Cloud PKI they released a couple of months ago. Now I think it is.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sounds like a good one. So yeah, should we just sort of start from the basics really? Well, what is PKI? What does it stand for?
Yep. So I kind of alluded to it just a minute ago, but it's public key infrastructure. Um, this really is a PKI is a system that uses digital certificates to authenticate and encrypt data between device and services. So in the world, we might know this as the the certificates that are on websites, the HTTPS certs so that it can encrypt the data between your web client and the server. So there's probably a couple of ways to look at this. That you have your public ones, which are out, not to say out on the internet, but the services are there on the internet for you to verify the certificates, and normally you have to pay. You purchase those services to be able to then it to be validated against your browsers, because your operating systems in effect have a subset of trusted certificates that they pull down onto your systems, and then you trust them. The other part to it is really probably just sort of using it internally. Maybe you've got internal websites that only you want to trust, or maybe there's ways to communicate with your service there. So probably at a high level, that's probably that is what it is. It's really certificate management, how they get created, how they get deployed. They're very sensitive, because if the private keys of the public keys is captured, then the person who's got the private key can then create new keys and seem legitimate. I guess there's been a few. Has there been one or maybe two instances of public keys being taken? I think there was probably one quite a while ago now. Can't remember who it was, but yeah. So there's a lot of security around them, making sure they're maintained and things like that. There.
Okay, so yeah, so how is it normally sort of deployed and managed? I assume in large organizations, this is like a a large issue, and that there must be a solution out there today to help you with it.
Yeah, so I mean, like we were kind of saying with the public certificates, things like, as an example, as a provider, Let's Encrypt, they look after it, and all you have to do is request certificates from them, and they do the signing. Same thing with some of the other providers, like I think GoDaddy does some as well, and there's a few other sort of providers out there. But from a private PKI perspective, um, so there are various sort of solutions. I think again, I'm more of obviously the Microsoft world, but I think there is some PKI services that you can run on Linux sort of operating systems. But from a Windows perspective, which is I think the most I've seen it being used, at least in an organization, you can use it. It's normally deployed using Active Directory certificate services. So normally you have to have a domain. You create these services, and normally you have in a best practice perspective, you normally have a root certificate, PKI, and then you have an intermediate one, which is the one that actually releases that communicates with requests and things like that. Now, I think normally the root certificate is normally turned off, shut down once you generate the key, so no one can attack it, try and get the root certificate, because this could be potentially access to your services that you have, so you're protecting it there. But generally, you have the intermediate there with certificate templates, and normally then you're distributing those certificates out to users or devices, to then for them to then use them against services. You can, once I said devices, it could be against a server as well as a user endpoint. So that could be for an internal service, so you can communicate with it securely there. Generally, with Active Directory certificate services, there is normally a template for devices that you tend to roll out to every device anyway. So there's better communication there. So it's generally sort of sorted. But then if you wanted to deploy to other non-Microsoft endpoints, so say iOS and Android, potentially could kind of talk to it directly, but it would be quite difficult to do. So you can do that with Intune and deploy a NDES server, or a PKS service, I think it is. In effect, then Intune can go and request it on behalf of the device and then deploy it for you. So that seems relatively okay. It can be semi easy to set up and get going, but actually securing it, making sure that you're dishing out the right certificates, that you've got the security controls in place, and maintaining it can be quite a lot, because in effect, if any of those servers crash, die, aren't backed up, then all of your certificates in effect are then, you can't create new ones, you can't revoke them, and then they can't also be validated, because you need to go back. Sometimes you need to go back to the root to those certificate servers to validate. So when you lose one of those servers, it's very it can break a lot of communication within an organization, if it's heavily used. So yeah, there's a lot of maintenance around them, make sure they're healthy, they're up to date. Sometimes even patching, or generally, organizations might not, they will patch the servers, but they're a bit more cautious around it. But say that you're moving from the next version of operating system because you've had it for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, etc. It's very difficult to plan and maintain that sort of migration up to the next supported operating system. So there's quite a lot there. I've not, from a Active Directory certificate services, I've sort of used it as a consumer of it, as an admin. I've probably not done that maintaining part of it, but I know a colleague of ours has done that and has had to maintain it, and it is can be challenging, and it's very you have to be very cautious around making changes to it or upgrading it, etc.
Yeah, when you've got such a, I'll call it a critical service, right? I assume it's ranked in that, at that sort of level in organizations, for its sensitivity and also the reliance of other, I suppose once certificates are generated, though, I suppose it's only at the life cycle events that becomes an issue. Is that fair to say? Once you've
Yeah,
deployed them, but I suppose it's still, yeah, it could still wreak havoc if you know
yeah.
if you had that type of scenario.
It depends. Yeah, it's the renewal of the actual trusted certificates, either the root or the intermediate, which has to be done after X years, depending on how often you set it to expire. And then as you said, you then got the user device part. But yeah, you're right. It's more around the renewals and maybe the creation where the most issues are, or the expiry, like I said, of the root or intermediate certificates. But sometimes if you do have revocation sort of URLs hosted on the same servers, and there may be some services out there that require that to validate that the certificate is still valid, then that can also cause an issue.
And do you need like high availability for these, this type of service? Does it tack alongside your, like, in the Windows environment, your domain controllers? Is it like usually on the same box? Is it extra infrastructure that you need to run this type of stuff?
So it's normally recommended to not put with the domain controllers, as in on the same machines. Technically it can be installed on the same machines, but like I said, generally you normally have the root CA turned off so that the root can't be taken. Because at least then, if the intermediate goes down, the root CA is still trusted. So if you spin up another intermediate server, at least you can start dishing out new certificates, in the meantime. But they can't be. They are individual servers. You can't have like high availability. You can't have two servers, named the same, dishing out the same type of certificates. As far as I'm aware, anyway. Normally, you'd have for availability, you'd have your single root CA and maybe two intermediates, both intermediate 1 and intermediate 2, with the ability for either of them to distribute certificates, and then the endpoints would choose one to get a certificate from it. Which one, they decide which one to get it from. So if one wasn't available, then the other one would continue. But yeah, you can't put them in active standby or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's why it's, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got sort of a critical part of your security, posture. You need separate, machines, separate infrastructure, somebody to manage them. Somebody that understands as well. How all of these things work together. I suppose, right? But I'm guessing that's what you know. Our IT teams sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm guessing it's just part of business as usual.
Yeah, and as we're kind of saying, there's a lot of maintenance there. So small businesses tend to not have that available to them. Some organizations don't have Active Directory. I mean, we do see small organizations have that because it's sort of the norm to have. Maybe in the past, maybe in today's, I say today's world, but the current times, you might use cloud-based machines now, but you can't. Those devices can still get certificates, but there has to be a domain somewhere where they can request them via the Intune plugin, in effect. But it does have to know who they are. But yeah, small organizations don't really have the chance to use it and maybe have that little bit of extra security, simplicity in their managing how they access services that they have.
Okay, that's sort of okay. That's great. And why do organizations create these certificates? What internally what are they used for?
So it's mainly to communicate with other endpoints, and as kind of we said, PKI is around encrypting data between services and devices. So this could be to do a certificate based authentication or communication, at least with an SMB share against a web service. Um, and really, the way that I've seen them being used is to access Wi-Fi and VPNs. So instead of the user, it's kind of a semi passwordless authentication in some form against Wi-Fi and VPN. So you can use 802.1x on Wi-Fi. So that means that it does it backs the Wi-Fi backs onto a radius so which checks certificates, basically. So the device has certificate. It means it's a trusted device. When it communicates, it then does that check and then allows you onto the network. This means that you don't need to have a pre-shared key on that Wi-Fi. So it's not something that can be stolen, shared out between non company people, maybe guests, things like that. They don't, they can't just connect to it. So it's quite a key security feature there. And same thing with VPN. You don't have to type a username and password on a device and then access it. In theory, with username and password, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's other checks that can go in place, but if someone installed the VPN client that you need to use on a normal machine that's not a managed device and type their username and password in with the right connection they need to get to, then they could in effect join that device to your network and then start accessing stuff that maybe they shouldn't, or start looking for vulnerabilities in the environment. So by having a certificate that's only deployed by trusted services like the domain controllers, well, not necessarily domain controllers, but the PKI servers and on your network, then it's a way of proving that's a trusted device. And then when you go to Intune and iOS and Android, same thing happens there. You can choose to say that they're trusted devices. So it's very, we see it a lot being used in those spaces, mainly for Wi-Fi and VPNs, and then potentially other services like SaaS services. So say if you're going through, if you're using something like Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, MDA, one way to detect that a device is trusted is by presenting a trusted certificate. So you put the root key, the public key of it at least, into MDA, and then it trusts any certificates then against that. So then you can decide, prove out devices is an internal one or a trusted device at that point. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, I think you can use it for actual websites, things like that. I think actually with some, I remember it in the past that you can get, say, I think it was like with stockbrokers, things like that. I think sometimes they give you from their system, you install a user certificate onto your machine to actually access their services. So you can't just go to any machine. You only get it once. If you need to redo it, you have to go through a rigorous security check to get another certificate. I've seen that in the past. Maybe not as much today, maybe because there's other controls, but definitely in the past.
Okay, so yeah, obviously a key sort of security element, but also, those upsides of giving you extra protection do come with some downsides, and having to manage it. And I suppose that segues us nicely onto, what is Microsoft's Cloud PKI service?
So Microsoft Cloud PKI service is pretty much what it sounds like, in that they allow you to deploy and affect your PKI server and services in the cloud, managed by Microsoft, and then you can easily distribute them using Intune to your endpoints. So this is that you're able to deploy your root certificate, put all of your information in there about the name of it, its location, things like that, as you would normally. Your encryption, what level of encryption you want it to be able to distribute, and how long the certificate lasts. Is it 5, 10, 15? I think maybe even 20 years on the root certificate, the actual root CA certificate authority. And then you can build your intermediates or your issuing certificate servers, and then they're in effect running secured, updated. You don't see that part. You just see them as sort of instances in the Intune portal, and I mean you can start setting up within 15, 20 minutes. To be fair, once they get up and running, and then you can start building your policies in Intune to then start distributing the roots, the root certificate, so that the device can trust it, and then you can start setting up the NDES configuration in there to then start deploying them to your endpoints, and they just start appearing. So within probably, I don't know, if you knew exactly what configuration you wanted, I think you could probably get it set up in about an hour and a half's time, ready to start deploying certificates.
Wow, that sounds a lot easier than having to manage. And I suppose is there just a shift of like having a need for this type of service when you are starting to move away from sort of on-premise infrastructure? Is this now a gap? Are companies currently having to, you know, put these servers into Azure as an example? And this is why this exists.
Yeah, so if you're staying with sort of Microsoft PKI side of things, then you still have to have Active Directory. You still have to have then those root CAs and everything. Even doesn't matter if it's on-premise infrastructure or in IaaS. It's still technically, I guess, in the term of on-premise sort of virtual hosting. But I think this is the sort of a move to allow you to, in effect, remove that service from Active Directory to slowly start having that reliance on it, because we're seeing a lot of devices now, or communication recommending that devices are now Entra joined rather than hybrid joined, because there's enough capability now out there that they can be Entra joined and still communicate with Active Directory or majority of Active Directory services, that or authentication there, where a user's being synchronized up to Entra. So this is just taking one of those services away. And I think a really big benefit of this is that any small business can now have a PKI service for their VPN, for their Wi-Fi, one, enhancing their security, but on the second half, making the user experience a little bit better, because now the user doesn't have to type in their username and password. So it's bringing in a little bit more of that passwordless authentication in some form. So it's really good. And one part of it is that you can, if you wanted to, you can bring your own root, in effect, certificate, and just use the intermediates to distribute the certificate. So you can get it to sign the issuing server, certificate authority, back down to a root CA. Maybe you've got on premise because you want it to back down. Maybe you want it to back onto that, so that you own the root CA and not, it's not hosted in the same place. So there is that option as well. One thing that's good about this as well is it's all HSM backed, so it's all hardware, managed by Microsoft. HSM sort of clusters in the background are being used to create the certificates for you. So sometimes there is a regulatory compliance there, to have HSM backed or hardware backed PKI services. That's just part of this service. You don't pay any extra for that.
Nice. And you mentioned Intune. Is that a hard requirement for this service? Would there be no point in using it in any other way?
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, you can only use it to deploy certificates to endpoints, things like that. So if you did need certificates on servers, or they need their individual server certificates, you would still have to have an on-premise PKI service. But then, I guess generally not domain controllers, but generally servers might be part of a domain anyway. Until we get more familiar with Entra joining them, which I think can only be done in Azure at the moment. So yeah,
Okay.
it really is only Intune. It is part of the Intune. I mean, we're kind of going into the next, what I was going to talk about in a minute, but it's part of the Intune suite. So you still need Intune Plan 1, but you can buy it individually, or it can be part of the Intune suite now. So if you've already got that, then you've already purchased it, in effect.
Yeah. Do you want to just talk through, pricing?
Yeah, so it's a per user per month license, and I believe it's $2 a month. So for a small organization, that seems quite, compared to hosting a server, or maybe two servers plus maintaining it, seems really reasonable there, for small and medium business. Obviously, as it scales up to larger organizations, that might not necessarily, I guess, be on par with an on-premise sort of service from a cost perspective. But at the same time, you're not managing it, you're not having to worry about it. So I think there's a bit of sort of thought around that. And I guess as well, if you do decide to buy the Intune suite and all the rest of the services, then it might be something that it'll be cheaper per user, in effect, if you break down those that suite into the various like 4 or 5. I can't remember how many different features are in there. I think it works out a lot cheaper than if you're using some of the other services.
Yeah, well, for organizations, it's always going to be to look at sort of total cost of ownership, right? And add that into their business case. Like you say, if you've got hundreds of thousands of users, you might be at a scale where actually it makes a little bit more sense, to, be managing it yourself. But like you say, the median sized business is not that size of business, so it's definitely going to be useful for, yeah, a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and you might have a roadmap that you're looking to remove your on-premise infrastructure. You might be looking to remove your active. Might be um, on that journey to remove Active Directory, and then move to Entra only, because that the services you're using are all cloud only. You maybe don't have much on-premise infrastructure at the moment. Maybe you don't have many servers. Maybe it's all SaaS services that you're using, but you've got Active Directory because that's where you started with, and that. So maybe you're on that journey and actually you just want to it's a price to pay, I guess, to doing that per se. But then you haven't got to manage all those other servers and everything else, let alone the hardware they sit on and things like that. But I mean, there are other cloud PKI services out there. I can't think off the top of my head what they are, but there's a couple out there today. But I expect they're at a similar sort of cost to this. But this is all sort of baked into your Intune, where you're managing, all your devices anyway. So it kind of just fits in there. And as I said, it's relatively easy to set up. As far as I'm aware, I think you can have up to 6 sort of 6 services in there, or certificate authorities. So that could be, one root certificate authority and then 2 issuing, and maybe two sets of those, because maybe you want to have a different certificate for a different service, and they distribute that certificate out to certain users to maybe segregate some of the environment, or some of the users out there. Um, or you in effect have a combination of all of 6 basically. So I think the probably the max you can have is 3 roots and 3 issuing servers, kind of thing. Not unless you're using on premise root CAs to do the backing of the issuing servers. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it sounds like a really good service. Any other points you want to talk about or discuss?
Uh, I guess the only thing really is that because it is only $2 per user per month, it's quite easy to get started, because you can only buy a couple of licenses and then get it all sort of spun up and tested and proven out before you purchase either the suite or the remaining license for your users. And there are trial licenses as well, as far as I'm aware. There is, at the moment at least, so you can get onto it and test it out and see if it works for you. Make sure it works with your VPN and Wi-Fi solutions, things like that. But yeah, that's probably it for me.
Cool. Thanks, Alan. Any other episodes that are similar to this one? I think it's quite unique, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't think that, probably only be an Intune one, but that was probably a couple of seasons ago. I mean, I can't believe we're on episode 13, to be honest, of this season. Don't know where that time's gone.
Yeah, exactly. Consistent uploads. That's how we get through them. That's for sure.
Yeah, but yeah, no, that we've done some Intune related episodes, so probably worth checking those out if you don't know too much about Intune itself. But yeah, that's probably it. So, what's our next episode then, Sam?
Yeah, so next week I'm going to be covering Azure Backup. Not possibly the most glamorous service in Azure. I suppose it depends who you talk to, but definitely a key part of anybody's cloud infrastructure. So yeah, I'm going to take us through Azure Backup, what it can do, how it sort of helps you streamline your backup process.
Yeah, okay, cool. Sounds good. Okay, so did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us to reach out to more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks very much for listening. I'll catch you on the next one.
Yep, thanks all.